We hear in focus groups often of people who say it just feels like Farage's shine is wearing off a bit, that he kind of feels a bit like more of the same, whereas they wanted to vote for something genuinely different. And at the same time, Andy Burnham has come in with this big focus on the cost of living, which we know is a unifying issue that Reform voters care about, but also really appeals to voters that Labour is losing to the left. So I think this is a perfect storm for Nigel Farage, and it's really benefiting Labour.
This latest polling, Labour is neck and neck with Reform in a YouGov Times poll, as the party seems to be capitalising on this Burnham Bounce, as we're calling it. Now, the polling company More in Common has Burnham's party on their highest vote share since November 2024, which is ahead of Reform for the first time in more than a year. And I'm joined now this morning by More in Common's Louis O'Gearan. A very good morning to you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Just talk us through this Burnham Bounce.
Yeah, I mean, I should start with a caveat that it is just one poll. But we see for the first time Labour leading since March 2025. Now, that's significant because that goes back to before last year's local elections when Reform took the lead, and that lead has been unbroken ever since. And as you say, it's also their highest vote share since November 2024 in the early months of this Labour government. So at face value, this is kind of a return to where we were, almost 2 years ago in a way.
But just on that caveat, I'm going to add another one in there. Is this just the excitement of a new Prime Minister in Downing Street, or is this something that perhaps could have a bit of longevity?
I mean, that's the big question for the summer. This poll came at the end of a week of really popular policy announcements, a big blitz of high-profile media appearances. It was a good week for the government to start on. I think it's really clear that Burnham and his team have learned from the mistakes of the Keir Starmer's government. Learned that you need to start with positivity rather than just focusing on negative news, and that clearly has paid off. The big question is whether that can be sustained as they get into the practicalities of governing, and whether that will last in the long term.
How much, Louis, do you think this bounce is accredited to Andy Burnham and a new Prime Minister, but also could it have something to do with the latest conversations that we've been having around Nigel Farage about financial donations and kind of the criticisms that he has faced because of those donations? Those two things are happening at the same time, correct?
Absolutely. I think it's almost a perfect storm for Nigel Farage. On the one hand, you have this finance row, which, to be fair, our polling shows that for Reform's core voters, it hasn't really deterred them very much. But for those newer voters, the ones they've gained since that general election, it really is putting a lot of people off. We hear in focus groups often of people who say it just feels like Farage's shine is wearing off a bit, that he kind of feels a bit like more of the same, whereas they wanted to vote for something genuinely different. And at the same time, Andy Burnham has come in with this big focus on the cost of living, which we know is a unifying issue that Reform voters care about, but also really appeals to voters that Labour is losing to the left. So I think this is a perfect storm for Nigel Farage, and it's really benefiting Labour.
Just speaking of that shine wearing off for a moment, when you're in your focus groups, is there any conversation about the Clacton by-election, and is there perhaps maybe a weariness from voters there that actually this is a little bit of a hoopla? Is that contributing perhaps to that lack of shine that you mentioned?
Absolutely. I think there's definitely a sense among some voters that Nigel Farage is trying to escape scrutiny. But among others, they actually really, that line about, taking on the establishment, this media stitch up, is actually something that resonates with quite a lot of people who support Reform and have this kind of big institutional mistrust towards the media and the establishment generally. So I think for some voters, it definitely will be off-putting, but also it just kind of raises the salience of this finance row. If people hadn't heard about that 5 million donation and the donation from George Cottrell, they will have done after that Clacton by-election was called.
What about the other parties? What about the Green Party currently?
Yeah, so our poll this week, again, just one poll, but it shows the Green Party falling to 8%. Now, this is significant because the last time they were this low was in October 2025, around the same time that Zach Polansky became leader. So what we're seeing is kind of a reversion to where they were when Polanski took over. This big Polanski wave of support seems to be looking a bit tenuous for the first time. And what we really see in our poll, while Labour are winning back some of the voters they've lost to Reform, the big gains they're making since Andy Burnham became leader seem to be Green voters or Labour to Green switchers who are now thinking of voting Labour again. And those are the voters that Zach Polanski has really benefited from.
Well, that's really interesting, and we're going to be talking about Zach Polanski a little bit later on in the programme, specifically a social media post that he put up that had a T-shirt with some offensive imaging on it. You just mentioned there kind of that popularity waning a little bit. Is that a trend that you see continuing? Is it more of a flurry of popularity of something different, of something new that kind of took Zach Polanski on that wave and perhaps isn't sustainable when you start talking about actual policies and whether or not the Greens have legitimate ideas for governance? Do you see that continuing, or when you're talking to people in your focus groups, is there still an excitement for something different?
Definitely. I think the thing that what we're not seeing here is kind of an erosion of that desire for something genuinely new. I think that has really struck me in focus groups in recent months and the past couple of years is the way that Green voters and Reform voters speak in quite similar language about feeling the system is broken, that hard work doesn't pay off, and that the political class really needs to change. I think the big challenge for politicians like Andy Burnham, who are representing an establishment party, is kind of demonstrating that you can still deliver that radical change through our existing institutions and you don't need something entirely new.
And is there anything that's coming through in the polling? And again, I will reiterate your caveat, Louis. I appreciate it's just one poll. Is there anything that's surprising you at the moment?
I think, to be honest, it's the speed with which Andy Burnham has kind of is seeming to become more popular. We saw his net approval rating increase to plus 15. That means that people are about 15 points more likely to have a positive view of Andy Burnham than a negative view. I think that doesn't sound massively impressive, but actually it's higher than Keir Starmer's all-time high when he won the 2024 general election. So, I mean, again, I think it's really interesting. It'll be so interesting to see if this can be sustained in the long term. But in the short term, I just think it's fascinating how quickly this big focus on the cost of living and this policy blitz over the last week has boosted Labour's popularity. Fascinating
indeed. And like you said, the caveat of who knows how it will hold, whether it will hold or not. But to look at those figures immediately in the aftermath of a new Prime Minister walking up Downing Street is very, very interesting. Louis O'Gearan, thank you so much for talking us through the numbers. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, just because we, of course, mentioned the Clacton by-election, here's Jane Garvey and Fee Glover just to give you a little rundown on exactly who is standing.
The candidates standing in the Clacton constituency by-election are as follows. Joseph, 77, Independent. Adam Al-Khatib, the Forward Party. Count Binface Party. Nick the Incredible Flying Brick, the official monster raving loony party. Tony Kane, Independent. Woke Trump Kazi, Independent. William Stewart James Clouston, Social Democratic Party. Rhys Cowan, Independent. Glenn Charles Cummings, Independent. Martin Davis, Freedom Alliance, Real People, Real Alternative, ! Andy Earlham, Independent. Nigel Farage, Reform UK. Atea Fard, Independent. Lawrence Fox, the Reclaim Party. Tony Francis, Independent. Robin Green, Independent. Abby Hookway, Independent. Howling Lord Hope, the official monster raving loony party. Stephen Richard Ingram, Independent. Amy Morris, Independent. Derek Norbert Morris, Independent. Michael Noel O'Keefe, Independent. Martin O'Brien, Independent. Nick Pellas, Independent. Ketan Kumar Pipalia, UK Voice, Safer and Stronger UK. Daniel Pocock, Independent. James Ransley, Consensus Party candidate. Jerry Smith, Independent. Kai Stevens, British Democrats. John Stevens, Rejoin EU. Baron von Thunderclap, the official monster raving loony party. Pamela Walford, Independent. Marcus White, Everyone is God Party. Mark Wilkinson, Independent.